Hello, everyone. I have Thandi Davids with me this evening and Neille. I'm Victoria Lucke. I was a journalist in South Africa earlier in my career. Then I became a lawyer in America, and now I'm living in Sydney, having a good time. So Thandi Davids is an executive producer of the film we all saw this evening, Influence. And she's very active in South Africa in promoting and developing film with a particular focus on nurturing African talent. And Neille has got a background in investigative journalism and documentary film, and she's co-founded 2 media startups. So this is a wonderful film that you've made. You're a co-director, Diana. I think I forgot to say that, with Richard Poplak. Yes. So you'll get be telling us more about that in a minute. But this film has extraordinary range and depth, and it's very important. And I know that you wanted to start a conversation, and we have a platform right here where we're going to jump in and have a conversation. And perhaps you can tell us what your original concept of the film was. When you went to interview Lord Bell in London, what were you thinking of doing, and how did that evolve? And was it based on those interviews? Perhaps you can talk about that. Go ahead.
Sure, Victoria. Thank you again so much for having us. I think there was a bit of a process, as there is with every film. I'm sure Thandi will agree, where you have an original idea and it changes and develops as you begin to work on it. I think because this film came out of the Gupta leaks, which I'm sure your viewers will know about, was that large tranche of emails that was leaked to our editor at the Daily Maverick. And because a team of journalists had been working on it, we already had a good sense of Bell Pottinger's role in South Africa at that stage. But I think the sense at the time of deciding to make the film was if they're doing this here, surely they've done this elsewhere. And it turns out that there was some very good journalism that had been done in the UK and elsewhere about the role of Bell Pottinger in geopolitics around the world. And I think the sense from that point was, well, let's see how far this goes. But we quickly realized that there was an opportunity to help explain the trajectory of weaponized communication as we know it today. And certainly Tim Bell was the perfect vector for showing that development, from advertising to political consulting to what we call reputation management. His trajectory really just showed how that was all possible and what it's kind of brought to our communication scene today.
So the film is really global in scope, as we know. And Thandi, I know you're focused on the business end. Did that help you in any way raise funds to get a production moving forward or to distribute the film? The fact that it was global.
Yeah, I think from our side, as when we make our documentaries, we always try and tell stories that are global, even if they're framed within an African context very specifically. The stories we try and tell are that. Yes, it was slightly easier, but always not. Raising money for films is not for sissies, as they say. We were fortunate enough to have relationships across the globe and brought on board a Canadian co-producer who felt as passionate about this film as we did. And from there, because of the story, because of Tim Bell, because it has its global legs, the ability to bring on broadcasters who saw the value of the story was good for us. We really did fund the story majorly internationally, as opposed to from South Africa. But yeah, that was the way we kind of worked. And it was a global story. As Di and Rich kind of unraveled and had gotten access to Tim Bell, it did make it easier for us to be able to go out and kind of raise those funds a bit more.
And what about distribution? Are you better able to market the film because, for example, it has the segment on Lord Bell's meddling in Iraq at the behest of the Pentagon? Does that make it more appealing to American audiences or distributors?
It's been a hard year. We literally went to Sundance with the film, premiered in January last year, and got back and COVID had hit, and effectively everything had changed. And I think for most filmmakers, producers, distributors, 2020 has not been a year you can use as a yardstick in terms of how distribution normally happens or how it doesn't happen. So it's been, from that perspective, it's been a different year, I think, for most filmmakers in terms of how their films have been bought, whether they've been bought, what the distribution mechanisms have been like. We've had to learn as we go along. You know, our festivals have all been online, which has meant that we haven't necessarily reached the same kind of audience as we would have if we were sitting in cinemas. Yeah, it's been a different go, but we're also very fortunate from a distribution perspective that we had 3 major broadcasters on board. ETV came on board prior to us making the film. CBC in Canada came on board. Arte in France came on board. So we had a good distribution network already as we went into making the film, which was of great assistance to us in comparison to other filmmakers who've had to start this journey in 2020 with no broadcasters and no kind of backup from a cinema perspective either.
Right. Well, the film's really important, as we all know. And, I'd be curious what you think you're achieving by showing this film in various places. What do you want to achieve? Do you want to change people's minds? Do you want to change their behavior? Diana, would you like to take that?
I think we all realized that in order for this film to be impactful, we needed to help audiences understand that this is a global issue. And while it originated in South Africa, and while we used specific case studies, from various different projects and work that Bel Pottinger and Tim Bell had done, we hope that it would be translated as a universal, a global phenomenon, I guess, this notion of weaponized information and what can be done with it for political gain. And I think we all hope that we would be able to reach an international audience, which we've been able to through our festival run, which has been very fortunate. And just to see how audiences around the world in different places have responded to it. I think again, we were very fortunate to have one physical festival, which was the Sundance Film Festival, where the film premiered. And to kind of see American audiences grappling with a film that was, that has its provenance in the UK, very much South Africa based and very global in scope, I think for American audiences was quite eye-opening. And we certainly had some quite emotional interactions with audiences afterwards. And it was interesting to see and gratifying to see that audiences can interpret these stories in their own contexts and can put those pieces together and make those connections and start to draw their own conclusions within their own politics. So that was certainly something we hope to achieve, and I hope we did.
Well, I think it's interesting that you gave the 1994 election in South Africa significant play in this film. And I assume one of the reasons for that was that the electoral processes in many developing countries have probably been subject to similar forces. But perhaps you'd like to talk about your decision to give that 1994 election as much airtime as you did. I can think of several reasons why you might have, but over to you. Thandi, Diana, who'd like to take that?
I'll start and hand over to Di. I mean, I think the key thing is, interesting, this is a South African story. And Bel had been here in 94. Interestingly enough, as I told Di, I actually lived in the same property he was living in when he was here in 94. But he was here very undercover. It wasn't kind of very well known. And I think from that perspective, because this is a story rooted in South Africa and starts from South Africa, his relationship with the country and politics did not commence with the Guptas. It started pre-1994. And I think it was important to understand that journey he's had within the country, and also the fact that he was working for two intrinsically opposing sides between 1994 and what he was doing with the Guptas. He'd gone from fighting with de Klerk, trying to keep white rights right, if you know what I'm saying, to now working with the Guptas and Zuma. So I think that was intrinsically important to the story from a South African perspective, that we did outline that history of this man within the country. Di?
Yes, and the 1994 election he fomented, I believe, based on what Stanley Greenberg said, it's now known that the government fomented black on black violence. Correct. And then later, of course, it was black on white violence when he was representing the Guptas. So it is a pretty extraordinary display of how you'll do anything for your client. and it doesn't matter what the client wants, you'll do it. You'll make it happen, which after all is what Lord Bell said he'd do. If as long as the client would do what he's told the client to do, he was going to represent them. So let's shift to Lord Bell for a moment, and then we can come back to the 94 elections if you like, unless you wanted to add something right now, Diana, did you?
Yeah, I think it is important to note that we recognize the 94 election as quite a turning point in the business model of political consulting in the way that Tim perpetrated it, which was that, this is post fall of the Berlin Wall. The world was changing significantly, and that election was really pivotal in terms of how new democracies going forward were going to be, treated and seen by the Western world, and in the way that we were turning towards a mostly democratic world, played a very, very large role. And in that industry was seen as, I suppose, a huge opportunity to get into the developing world and into election work in that regard. And so it was very important for us to be able to understand just what working as a political consultant and a reputation manager meant in that context. Because essentially what we established, and which I think is very clear today, is that myriad business opportunities stem from elections in vulnerable places, and the fact that election was as manufactured as it was, I think, is a very strong indication of what came next, which is essentially the wholesale industrialization of the election process. These are not new trends, but I think the fact that it was kind of formalized into almost a business. Now you meet election consultants, and it's a job title. These are people who go around the world particularly to developing countries, and tell them how to run their elections and how to make sure they grease the palms of the right people and reap the benefits of the business contracts that stem from that. So I think Tim played a huge role in pioneering that space for a whole new generation of practitioners.
Well, of course, one of the fascinating things about the influence industry during the 1994 elections and Lord Bell's operations was that social media didn't exist. And then, he comes back in 2016 and you have social media and polarization and alternative facts and the manipulation of group behavior all being par for the course. I mean, this was the time of the Trump 2016 campaign. Brexit was getting underway, and we all know the kind of tactics that were being used across the globe. Do you think the influence/disinformation industry has changed since then?
And do you want to go with that?
Since 2016?
Since 2016, absolutely. I think that was one of the most important years for a real marker of the shifts that we've been experiencing since the 70s, since Margaret Thatcher came into power, and this idea of political campaigning, particularly on the conservative side, became so kind of massaged and very carefully put in place as part of the election and the political process. I think with you can kind of draw a direct line between those campaigns for Thatcher and the promotion of neoliberalism in the UK to the conservative revolution and the culture wars in the United States. And I think what they have in common, which I think Tim played a huge role in, is understanding that that messaging is everything. If you can get the punchy, the strong, well-worded, slick campaigns out to the right people, you can have a major impact on the way election processes run and the outcomes of elections. And I think that was something that the Conservative Party in the States has been, or the Republican Party, should I say, has been incredibly successful at, particularly in the Trump era, right, which is manipulative communication, and then also understanding at that stage the role of big data, which was of course available to them, and how those two together can make a formidable mix and really change the shape of politics in an entire country, and they've in the States that has huge knock-on effects for the rest of the world as well. So absolutely, I think that was pivotal.
Right. Let's switch to the action by the PRCA, the regulatory public relations body in Britain. They expelled Bell Pottinger, as we know. Now, Thandi, I'm wondering whether you think that would have happened had the same tactics been used in another country do you think the PRCA would have acted, or was it because it was South Africa and the particular sensitivities of South Africa, perhaps in British perception?
Look, I think we have on a lot of levels an oversized voice as an African country. We do have much stronger Western relationships than a lot of other developing countries, if I could put it that way. And of course, our ties to the UK are much stronger than others. So absolutely, I think that was part of the point. I do think we also have a fairly educated population here, and I think we're not going to take this lying down kind of attitude. We do come from a country of fighters and protesters who make their voices known and heard. So I think that from that perspective, absolutely, it was something to do with South Africa, but on some levels, it may also have been Tim's time, I think potentially, yes, it was pushed from here. Yes, it was the coverage that was coming out of organizations like the Daily Maverick. It was the push by South African politicians and by the NPO section, the non-governmental sector, to get these stories out there and to press fire where fire needed to be pressed at the end of the day, and to make sure that we weren't sitting in the situation we were in, where we've got a Tim Bell coming in here and causing havoc within the country. But on that level, absolutely, I think it is about South Africa and about the voice South Africa has, or the oversized voice in some levels South Africa has. But I also think in terms of the British media and press, on some level, Tim's time had come. I think they're kind of like, this man's been running roughshod over a lot of things for a number of years. And this kind of just opened up the door for that country to have that debate around Tim Bell and around the fact that this colonial meddling is still taking place on so many levels.
Well, I think on that note, which is a very good note to end this conversation on, I'll say thank you to both of you. We could talk for hours. It was a fascinating film. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to talk to you, because I wouldn't have watched it 2 or 3 or 4 times had I not. But I really enjoyed getting to know the film better. And I appreciate you joining us. It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you.